All right, it's recording. Okay, Dr. Robert, can I have your opinion on this issue that's been happening in Malaysia?
Sure. My understanding is that there's a high school in Kota Baru in Kelantan, which is up north. And it started out with the sighting of a black figure at the school. And then other students began looking for it, and then they reported seeing it as well. And then there was this photo that was taken, which is kind of vague and unconvincing, but it was posted on social media. And that seems to have further stoked up the students with their anxiety. And then panic kind of spread through the school. There was screaming, fainting, altered states of consciousness, and possession states where they claimed to be possessed by spirits. I think over 100 students were affected. And if you look at this, I have collected, since the early 1950s, over 400 cases of mass hysteria in Malaysia alone. And this is a real classic outbreak. These outbreaks just don't happen. They all have a context. And to be able to accurately diagnose what's going on, you have to understand that context. So my advice is, first of all, as a foreigner, as an outsider, Malays have a particular belief in supernatural beings. You've got the hantu, the hantu eunuch, the toil, the jinn, the bunyan, the oily man. They have all these beliefs in these creatures. And who am I to say, I'm a scientist, but who am I to say that they're wrong? So I'm not trying to change their beliefs in those creatures. Who knows, maybe some of those supernatural creatures are real. What I am saying, though, is that many Malaysians believe in these. What's happening is not from these creatures. It's been happening around the world in different cultures, in different religions, and it's not caused by these beings. It's a psychological phenomenon. Under stress, the nerves and neurons that send messages to the brain become disrupted, and the messages get garbled. So you get twitching, shaking, hallucinations, possession states. Possession states happen in all religions, in all cultures, and they're triggered by stress. They can look very real. It looks like somebody's possessed at the time, but it is a psychological phenomena caused by anxiety. It is not related to Islam. It's not related to jinns or toils. It's caused by stress. And the only way to stop the outbreak is to reduce the stress. So there seem to be several things going on here at play in the outbreak. My first recommendation would be to shut down social media at the school, shut off the Wi-Fi, shut off the mobile phone communication system until the outbreak settles down. Because it's clear to me that social media is spreading these images of black figures, which are very vague, and it could be anything in those photos. So it's really upsetting the students. So that would be my first recommendation. My second recommendation would be to shut down the school, at least for a week, maybe even 2 weeks, to let the anxious students calm down. Back in 1983, there was an outbreak in Kedah. It lasted for 5 years, and it only ended when the former Prime Minister, the Tunku Abdul Rahman, went to the school and he talked to the girls. And what was going on at that school at the time, he said, it was all work and no play, and it was too much stress and too much study. And they transferred the girls to a liberal school, and within a few weeks, the whole thing resolved. My other recommendation would be to look at the school and to see if there's anything that's an underlying stressor at the school that has been causing anxiety there. And the third concern I have happens to be with the BOMO. They've called in a number of different BOMOs to the school. And BOMOs are a double-edged sword. In many instances, they'll call in the BOMO, and they'll do some ceremonies and supposedly root out the various creatures that are there. And it seems to work. In other instances, though, especially in major outbreaks, they'll call in the BOMO and it won't work. And they'll call in another one and it doesn't work. And they'll call in several, like what's happened at this school, and it doesn't work. And it can have a rebound effect. if the initial calling of the BOMO doesn't work, these outbreaks tend to get worse, and they can last for much longer, because bringing in the BOMO reinforces the belief that there are supernatural spirits in the schools. And so you have to be very careful when you bring BOMOs into a school system, and it can actually have the opposite effect.
Can you explain that further as well? The opposite effect, meaning that it reinforces the anxiety, the stress.
Yeah, the whole thing here is to figure out the stressor. There's two main types of mass hysteria outbreaks. The first one usually happens in Western countries, and it involves a sudden exposure to an anxiety-generating stimulus. It could be a smell, and it usually is an odor, and it's thought to be like some kind of poison. People get concerned that they're being poisoned, and they'll be sick for a few hours, and they'll recover very quickly. It's called mass anxiety hysteria. There's no underlying stress that's been going on for weeks or months. It just happens right then. It's over quick and fast, and they recover very quickly. The second type is much more common in non-Western countries, especially in Malaysia, where you get an underlying anxiety at a school. Usually, the students will complain about something that's going on at the school. They're giving too much work, too much sleep, and it builds up and builds up over weeks and months. The twitching, shaking, altered states of consciousness. These outbreaks tend to go for weeks or months. That's like the one in Kedah in 1983 to 1987. From what I can tell, from looking at this case, this looks almost like a Western case where I think the underlying trigger appears to be this black figure. And then the exacerbating factor is the social media spreading this image of this black figure. And then the students are looking for this black figure, and they're seeing shadows and all sorts of things. And with the stress, they can even be hallucinating occasionally as well. So, and your eyes can play tricks on you. So, from what I can tell, this is an anxiety-based, sudden reaction type outbreak of mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria. But the problem now is, by bringing in the BOMOs, and it doesn't seem to have resolved, it can really prolong the outbreak. So I think the real culprit here is social media propagating these figures, like I saw in the media with this like photo of a black ambiguous figure in the background. So I would shut down social media at the school. I would shut down the Wi-Fi, no mobile phone use for at least a week or two. I'd shut down the school for a few days and let everything calm down. And I would just leave the BOMOs out of it for now. And in a week or two, start the school back up. And I think things should be fine.
Okay. And you know, it has been reported in the Western media, most recently in BBC. So what do you think is the Western world opinion about this story? Do you think this is one of a bizarre story that's happening in Southeast Asia?
No, you know, I don't. I really sympathize for Malaysia. I lived in Malaysia for several years. I love Malaysia. I love the Malaysian culture. I love the fried kway teow and the nasi lemak. It's a wonderful country. I've had conversations when I worked with Quintech University. I've had conversations with members of the education department in Malaysia. And they said, you know, we have files on this stuff that's been going on for years. And I say, you know, I'd love to research those files and to look at this in greater depth. And they said, oh, no, we would not want you to do that because to us, it embarrasses the country. Like, we're a developed country, Wawasan, Duapulo. We're a developed country, and this can give the image that we're a backward country. But I look at it differently. It's just part of Malaysian culture and the belief system that's there. Malaysia is a 21st century country. It's a really well-developed country. And I don't think this is anything to be embarrassed about. It's something to be understood. And you know, just like Bigfoot in the United States, I know you have sightings of JB and places like that as well. Just like Bigfoot in the United States or sightings of UFOs, it's part of Western culture. And it's something that you don't want to do away with. It's something you want to record and keep as part of your own cultural heritage. And like it or not, outbreaks of mass hysteria in Malaysia have been part of Malaysian social culture, and the Malaysian Malay in particular social landscape for over 70 years. It tends to happen in Malay schools to Malay females because they have this notion of having weak stamina. They believe they have this weak mental strength and that they're more susceptible to these things. But it happens all over the world. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that should be studied. I'm the only person to have written a book on the history of mass hysteria in schools. I think it would be beneficial to have a look at that book and to better understand what's happening there. To me, it's education. And it's not having a foreigner coming in and saying, oh, that's backwards. You shouldn't believe in these things. Like I said, who knows? Maybe there are hantus. Maybe they are jinn and toil creatures. But whatever those things are, it's separate but with what's happening here. This is a psychological phenomena that's happening completely different from that, but it gets grafted onto it because people reinterpret this now as, oh, it's part of the jinn, or it's part of the toil, or it's a hantu, or something like this. So I'm very sympathetic with the Malaysian authorities and trying to understand this. I wouldn't sweep it under the rug. It's certainly not a sign of a backward culture or society. And I firmly believe that a characteristic and key feature of a 21st century country, and Malaysia is a 21st century country, is to look at these things and record them and to not try to sweep them under the rug. And to better understand these and have educational talks about these at schools so you can stop this from happening, because it happens a lot. This happens to be a case that's gotten a lot of attention in the media, but as I'm sure you know, these outbreaks happen all the time. And most of them don't get recorded in the media. This happens to be a big one. But it's something that we need to understand and educate ourselves about. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We have outbreaks of mass hysteria here in the United States all the time. It's usually triggered by sudden exposure to an odor. We had the outbreak in Leroy in Western New York in 2011 and 2012, on which I published an article in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. And that is nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that we need to just understand. So it's Malaysia, the United States, it's happening everywhere.
Also, you've recorded around 400 records on this hysteria. May I know what's your interest in actually understanding about mass hysteria, especially in Malaysia? Was there a particular interest that sparked you to actually record and actually do some research on this?
I did field work in Malaysia on the history of Latah, L-A-T-A-H.
Okay, Latah.
And, yep. And I've also looked at different mental disorders in Southeast Asia when I lived in Malaysia. And like I said, Malaysia is a wonderful country. I love Malaysia. And my wife is a Malay. And in the many years that I've spent there, I've noticed that when you talk about the supernatural, oftentimes, at least in the past, people will clam up and they don't want to talk about it. But I think it's important to talk about it. And like I said, to understand that as a scientist, I need absolute proof for supernatural phenomena, but I'm not here to lecture the Malay people that these creatures don't exist. They may very well. But what's happening here has nothing to do with these creatures. This is a psychological phenomena that's taking place. And the 400 reports, most of those reports I got from sitting in the offices of the New Straits Times and collecting reports, and also the digitized reports from the Straits Times in Singapore in a number of the other, the Malay Mail and a number of the other the other Malay media, and just collecting them and translating those reports to have a better understanding of the phenomena in Malaysia. And this is not unusual. I mean, there was a massive outbreak in the early 60s. There was another one coinciding with big floods in Malaysia in the early 1970s. This is one in a long line of cases that usually strike Malay females at Malay schools. And again, it's nothing to be ashamed of. They happen in America, and it's just something to be understood and to be educated on. And that's why I write articles in scientific journals on this phenomena, because I want to, in my recent book on the history of mass hysteria in schools, I want to educate people about what's going on, because these can be very disruptive. And these can disrupt the lives of young girls in Malaysia for months and months. And now it's changing because of the social media. These outbreaks, I think, are going to be extended because they end up on YouTube, on Facebook, and it's extending these outbreaks. And we have to understand the social media and how it's doing that. So that's what I'm looking into now, is how social media is impacting on these.
Okay, what were some of the reactions, especially from Malaysians, on your book and on your research? What did they say, especially the Malays? Do you have some?
Well, my book has only recently come out. And I would hope that my book, The History of Mass Hysteria in Schools, which starts from 1566 in a school in Holland, which was not unlike what's going on in Malaysia today. And that's the interesting thing. These outbreaks are similar in different cultures, which shows to me that it's a psychological phenomenon. So it's my trying to understand these in global context. There's not a country I'm aware of where outbreaks of mass hysteria haven't occurred. They just have their own signature depending on the cultural backdrop. And of course, in Malaysia, you got the belief in all these creatures. And you have Malay females have been enculturated into keeping their emotions withheld. That's why you also get outbreaks in factories as well in Malaysia. Usually Malay females again. And they're taught not to challenge authority. So if they get into a situation, often these outbreaks, there's an issue going on in the school and they're unhappy with the issue. And so they're taught to not talk about and verbalize the issue. And they just hold it in, and then they start twitching, shaking, go into altered states of consciousness, and they bring in a BOMO, and they'll have like a go-between with a BOMO, and they might say, well, we're unhappy, there's too much study going on, or they're working us too hard at the factory. It's almost like a subconscious negotiation takes place where the problem gets resolved. Now, in this case, this looks to me not like that. This seems to be more like a Western-style outbreak that has started with this figure of this black person, black creature, and then it's got onto social media, and that's really exploded and exacerbated the situation. So like I say, social media, I'd shut it down for that school. Mobile phones, I'd shut it down as well. And I'd shut the school down for a week, let things calm down. And then I would be monitoring social media in terms of, not being, having these pictures circulated, because it just causes so much anxiety among the students. And they can leave school. Students left the school and things would start to calm down, and then they'd start to flare up again when they went back to school the next day. Now they go home, they've got the computer, they turn their computer on, and there it is again. They can watch it. They can see those fears again. And so you have a real danger here, I think, with social media, and they really need to look at social media, especially at that school.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Robert, for your time.
Okay. Look, it's my pleasure, and I can't emphasize enough that, this is not a backwards phenomena. It's a human phenomena. It's a global phenomena, and Malays and Malaysians should have nothing to be ashamed of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Malam.
Selamat malam juga.